So I'm just going to ask you two questions based on some work that you did in 2024 that was a paper published, Why Europe Needs a Nuclear Deterrent, a Critical Appraisal. So in that paper, you argued that a common European nuclear deterrent could enhance strategic autonomy by reducing reliance on the United States. Given that, how do you assess the trade-off between greater autonomy on one hand and the increased signaling ambiguity or alliance confusion that could happen with such an initiative?
First of all, thank you, Mila, and to Scrap Weapons for inviting me. No, it's a very good question. When I start researching about this issue back in 2023, 2000, because I started my research for this paper in the end of 2023. I got some interviews in Brussels, in Paris, and with some people in the UK. At the time, I posed these options from the point of view of the European Union. But then suddenly I started researching more and more, and I started writing more about it in other papers. And I think the best solution for the European nuclear deterrent would be one that would be attached to NATO, meaning the European countries like the UK and France, they would combine forces and they would provide that kind of capability to Europe. Regarding the question of strategic autonomy and the US reliance or more meaning more autonomy from the US. Well, I think at this point, Europe, even though I wrote in my paper how to achieve that, I believe that we are not in that moment
Yeah.
to have a Euro nuclear deterrent totally autonomous and from NATO or from the United States. So I think it's better in the current situation where we have this great power competition with China and Russia and the U and Europe is in the middle. So
Yeah.
I think the best option would be this kind of European nuclear deterrent with the capabilities of UK and France within NATO, probably with some kind of arrangements with other non-nuclear states, European non-nuclear weapon states, that would provide us some kind of a peer to the United States against the two-peer challenge of Russia and China. And one of yeah, so basically this is the idea. More to complement the NATO and US deterrent and not to substitute the
Okay.
US and NATO deterrent.
So for you, it's about working sort of within the existing structures rather than deviating and going off on a separate kind of venture that's completely.
Exactly. Eventually create a new structures just for the Europeans, a kind of a new NATO Europe
Yeah.
or the European pillar of NATO within NATO. Because as you know, only four countries of the European Union are not in NATO. So if we have countries that are not in Schengen, I'm talking about the European Union, are
Yeah.
not in the Eurozone, why not also create some kind of deterrence or defense policy that it's both for that is somehow more or less feasible for countries that are both for NATO and both for the European Union, right? Because if you don't do that, you are spending money and resources in two different organizations when you can just do one, and then also bring the UK to the table because the UK is part of NATO and is not part of the European
Yeah.
Union. So yeah, so that would be an idea. Probably the other colleagues of this idea of NATO in Europe had a better solution, but my solution is basically for the countries like Austria, Ireland, and Malta and Cyprus to opt out of this European security, and then the other countries that would be would be attached to NATO. This European pillar of NATO would be this new European nuclear policy, deterrent policy. That's an idea. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but this is one of the ideas that I've been developing since some years from now. So if you have more questions about it, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I mean, this sort of leads into my next question. So in the paper, you discussed four possible architectures for a European deterrent. You talked about French-led, pan-European, European deterrent overall, and a national or indigenous program. I think you talked about in Germany. Would you
Mhm.
mind just quickly explaining those for anyone who's listening who hasn't read your article, and then telling me from a feasibility and credibility standpoint, which do you consider the most promising if Europe does choose to start working towards some sort of shared deterrent?
Good question. Again, over the years, meaning since I published this paper, I already uh, made an evolution on this kind of different options. So, but okay, but I will explain the four ones that I did in the past, and the two or three ones that I believe that are the most feasible today.
Great.
So first, regarding the one that is dependent on France. So this is the France deterrent. So when I wrote, when I wrote the paper, was like the idea that would be a provider to European Union or European Union states, member states. So France, because they are the only country within the European Union that have nuclear weapons, so therefore they would be the best solution, the first solution that you might have in your mind to be a European nuclear EU nuclear provider for other member states. And then you don't have any problems with the NPT because the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because France is already part of the NPT, so there is no issues there. The problem is when I got deep and also talking with some officials from the government of the French government, I realized at the time that the idea that have about the European nuclear dimension of France probably might not be totally uh, in the same railroads, should I say, as the other member states of the European,
Okay.
meaning the views of France might not be the views that countries like Poland or others might have about what they think what kind of security France should provide to them and not what France should provide to them. So this is an issue. The question of reassurance, meaning reassurance these states. So there is a bit of debate because basically France, in the first iteration, when I start, I think they evoluted that there was an evolution on their thinking recently. But when I start in 2023, 2024, basically the idea was we have this hardware, these weapons. So we are, if you want protection from us, you should pay for this protection, and and you will pay visits to us to see how this program works. But you don't have any kind in my view, from what I research, from where I talk with these officials, these countries would not have any kind of should I say, I'm trying to put the more diplomatic words on this, uh, any kind of involvement in terms of decision-making
Yeah.
process. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that France has like around 300 nuclear warheads. And of course, against Russia, they have what, for example, Sir Lawrence Freedom would say minimum deterrent, meaning the weapons that they have now in France and the territory of France, they provide a minimum deterrence with which the which against, for example, countries like Russia is minimum, so it works. But when you want to expand to other parts, meaning other regions of Europe, that deterrence might not work. So either they have to increase uh, quantitative in terms of quantity the weapons, or they have to change uh, their doctrine, and so that's an issue. And at the time I didn't see that they would change the doctrine in a
Okay.
ways that would fulfill that gap. So this is two ways. This is why so the second one, since there was the pan-European, where the second option, where I would combine, the proposal would combine French and UK forces, and would be open to countries even outside of the European Union that would like to join on this option, and this option would basically focus on decision making process in terms of who decides to use the bomb would be again the Prime Minister of the UK or the French President, but there would be in this kind of option more space for countries that belong to this pan-European deterrent, meaning the countries that would be protected by this deterrent. They will have uh, some kind of participation on the doctrine or rules of engagement of this um, of this deterrent, meaning like something like the nuclear planning group, but just for this specific option. Then the third one, the Euro deterrent will be basically the idea of having just a nuclear deterrent by, raised and created by the European Union, like with the funds of the European Union, and with a federal nuclear weapon European deterrent, basically. Which I provide different ways of achieving it, but I think it's in hindsight, I think now I think it's we are far away from there, because I think the way that we can achieve that kind of Euro deterrent with European EU funded by the European Union, with nuclear weapons funded by the European Union, we'll have to reach to a level of federalism in Europe that we don't have it now.
Yeah.
So that was just an option. And the fourth option would be the indigenous German nuclear deterrent. It's because relates to uh, to the actually to the NPT regime, meaning when the Germany at the time, the Federal Republic of Germany, Western Germany, they decided in the 70s, around 74, 75, to enter in the NPT regime, to be a part of the NPT regime. They made a declaration. And that declaration of the ratification, basically, they stand different issues, but one of the issues is that, okay, we are a non-nuclear weapon state. We abide to the rules of NPT, but but that would not jeopardize if we have kind of a European supranational identity, meaning the European
Okay.
Union. So if it's part of or if the European Union needs a nuclear arsenal, that would they would not become a non-nuclear weapon state. They are willing not. There's like this exception. And I talked with different persons in France and in Brussels, and at the moment I'm not sure, but the countries that were basically the guarantors of the NPT, the depositary states, meaning U.S., the UK, and at the time Soviet Union, now Russia,
Yeah.
they never said anything against this. So, from my knowledge and from those people I talk with, nobody knows if they were against this declaration. So there is, in my view, there is a kind of a path, legal path, for Germany to have their nuclear deterrent if it's within the European Union umbrella. So that's okay, but then there's different issues. Of course, there are many constraints, as I mentioned in the paper, for them to do that. But still, that's another option. Then, just to finish, I actually my thinking of this also according to the events that were happening since I published the first this paper. I wrote other papers and then I focus again in three options. Now not in four, but in three options. One option that again, France forced the FRAP as a European pillar. That could be either for the European Union or for NATO, but the Europeans have to change. And then the Anglo-French umbrella, which me and others starting to dig more on it, which my original project was a pan-European deterrent, which I transformed in Anglo-French umbrella. And basically, they got this option, in my view, got a reboot with a new declaration, the French UK declaration on the nuclear cooperation, the Northwood Declaration from July 10.
Yeah.
I think for the first time, the French are willing um, to share in terms of nuclear uh, planning or debating how to use these weapons or the doctrine. At least in the declaration, there is an idea that the UK and France they can join forces and discuss the way that deterrence would be um, be convened. So that's at the moment I think it's the most promising. And of course, for me, I would see that within NATO and not outside of NATO. And even if I know the French are not part of the of the nuclear planning group of NATO, but because they have issues with the US probably umbrella. Well, the idea probably to complement what the US provides to NATO probably would create a group just for the Europeans, like kind of a Euro group where like a Euro planning nuclear planning group just for Europeans. That would be probably would be a solution for France to be involved. Again, the idea that I mentioned before, this idea of the European pillar of NATO or NATO Europe. And then the third option, then I mentioned was the idea of European multilateral nuclear force, and this European multilateral nuclear force would not just rely on French and UK capabilities, but would also bring what, for example, NATO does with the NATO sharing states with US, meaning probably in this European multilateral nuclear force, there would be fighters or frigates or whatever that would transport French or UK weaponry, nuclear warheads within, to be more involved. And there would be some kinds of new decision-making processes and nuclear sharing where non-nuclear weapon states might contribute more for this deterrent conventionally, but also doing exercises with this force. Basically, what the NATO does, but NATO does with the US included, right? This would be just for the Europeans and relying on this force. And in my view, these options, or these three options that I mentioned now, would be all complementary to US and NATO current extended nuclear deterrence.
Yeah, and I guess especially that last one you talked about is a way of improving cooperation and technology sharing and even maybe conventional support from other states without increasing proliferation in Europe. I think something
Indeed.
that's really interesting coming up through all the discussions I've had is a lot of people don't want to see further proliferation of nuclear weapons in other countries that don't already have them in Europe, but there's
Exactly.
definitely some room for increased cooperation between the US and France and other countries kind of supporting that.
Yeah,
Leading
but
on, yeah,
I don't exclude a small increase of nuclear weapons from France and UK side.
yeah,
If it's needed, I'm not saying that might be needed, but but if it's needed, I think yeah. But the idea is not to increase other weapons to other countries,
Yeah.
especially countries like Poland, where they have now Belarus as a nuclear sharing state of CSTO or Russia, and they feel it like that probably they should be more, they should have, they should be a nuclear sharing state, and if not, there are even conversations that they might want to have nuclear weapons if they are not NATO sharing state. That was a debate made by the Prime Minister and the President of Poland some months ago. Uh, so, so this multilateral force would be more to engage, for example, countries like Poland, and not to proliferate. Understand?
Yes.
Would
No,
be
I
that idea. That idea.
Yeah, I think it definitely kind of reflects the changes in opinion, both publicly and also security, that those conversations are happening in Germany and Poland, where maybe 5, 10 years ago it didn't seem like that those were even in the realm of conversation. Moving on then to my next question, you've talked about various obstacles. Which do you think would be the most significant to the creation of a shared European nuclear force? Do you think it's political, legal, institutional, maybe even public opinion? What do you think's kind of holding everything back?
Well, I think all of the factors that you mentioned, all these points that you mentioned, I think they affect the decision-making process. But I believe from the studies that I've seen by other colleagues, I believe there is more appetite for Europeans to rely on nuclear weapons than before
Yeah,
because of the threats that they see from Russia and so on. Well, the best case is Sweden, right? We have a country that's since the 60s had been one of the champions of nuclear disarmament education, relied a big portion of their multilateral diplomacy was to make sure that nuclear weapons would not exist, the biggest threat to the world and all that. And now, when they decided to go to NATO, doesn't mean that they are not pursuing nuclear
yeah,
disarmament anymore, but at least they changed dramatically their views of their own security, meaning they started to rely on nuclear weapons for their security, when before they didn't. So I saw that shift. What threat perception might do not just to public opinions, but also to the elites, to the political elites. And I think this is, in my view, this is one of the best cases in Europe. But I saw other studies from Europe that also they other countries, they other political opinions of other countries, they believe that uh, Europeans should rely more, should do more on these matters in terms of relying on nuclear weapons for their own defense against Russia. Um, so this is one thing about public opinion. The political side, yeah, I think there was a huge taboo of doing until recently of doing something that Europeans can do together. Meaning that we actually, the Europeans at this level, they are not discussing this since the 50s, as I mentioned
yeah,
in my paper. Um, and I think this was one of the first times where Europeans were willing to unite and to discuss these issues. And I think, well, I believe that the 2025 Northwood Declaration with France and UK paves the way against that taboo that we started to not talking about the 50s. And there are reasons for that. As also I mentioned in my papers, not just in that one, is the question of the reliance on the US, which I believe now is not so much in jeopardy since
yeah,
the Hague summit. So I think since the Hague summit, I think the Europeans are more reassured with President Trump and the US. But there's another question, the question of dealing with the two-peer challenge, meaning Russia and China, and dealing with two peers that could provoke two nuclear crises at the same time in Europe, I don't know, around Kaliningrad or even in Russia, Ukraine, sorry, or in Taiwan or around Japan. So imagine if it happens at the same time. The United States, because they have alliances with South Korea, um, Japan, and Australia, and also and other countries in the region. They will have to commit also their nuclear forces, deterrent forces, to that part of the world. So in my view, I think against the two-pier challenge, where the United States is no longer just one, the United States has no longer a nuclear adversary like Russia or Soviet Union. Now they have to fight against two, and I think the Europeans should do more. You understand? So this
Yeah.
is the view, and I think that's I think politically, I think people might be more willing to start discussing these issues, because even 1 year ago when I was in the UK in the meeting. Which I cannot say where. We discussed that the idea of the Americans were that they wanted the French and the UK to be more involved in terms of providing conventional capabilities to America and to NATO. And now we are seeing that the Europeans and the Americans, they just want conventional capabilities from those countries. They also want them to engage on the nuclear side. One example is what the UK, the British did now. They start buying F-35As, which they have F-35Bs. So F-35A has a dual capability, nuclear and conventionally, and F-35Bs just have conventionally capability. So I think the UK is seeing more that there is a more need to engage on these issues, and I even some say that the UK would is not just a nuclear weapon state, will be again a NATO sharing. States, meaning they also probably they will have U.S. nuclear warheads in their those fighters, or not, or might just have new British nuclear warheads because they are slightly increasing their weaponry at the moment. So that's I see more an engagement on that. Institutionally, that's the hardest one. That's institutionally, I think we have to create something new or something within the structure, which I defend,
Yeah.
which would be within NATO, and a European group within NATO. But that you need political will. So this is one of my proposals. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm just saying that things are evolving. When I start, as I mentioned, researching this deeply on this in 2023, this was be like a science fiction issue, and now it's becoming more reality. So we might get there, but we don't know where, when. So that's why I think at the moment we should more engage on making these forces as complementary to the United States and not substituting the United States. And of course, we don't need the Europeans. They don't need to match American or Russian arsenals. They just have to have a credible path for their where the deterrence of those countries would be credible enough to deter countries like Russia and China, mostly Russia. So I recently wrote on this article on the ECPR in the when I was talking about the two-plate challenge in the loop, this blog. Uh, for example, the idea of having a reasonable sufficiency concept, the concept of reasonable sufficiency. So we don't have to increase in quantity the forces. You just have to create them in a way that they are more credible to deter adversaries.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left on the call, so I'm just going to ask you one final question. You touched on it a bit with your discussion about Sweden, but how do you think pursuing an independent European nuclear capability would affect EU countries' identity as peace-promoting powers or non-proliferation efforts that they take place?
Yeah. So exactly. So what as I said, I no longer believe there would be independent, totally independent
Yeah,
nuclear deterrent at the moment. I'm focused on more on this idea of Anglo-French nuclear umbrella, which will be included, in my view, in the NATO as a complementary to the existing arrangements and to the US, to provide more capabilities to the alliance and to the West Alliance, to the Western Alliance. But I believe that, of course, if if independent nuclear deterrence was would be fashioned in a way that would be completely independent, I believe there are two ways of seeing it. I believe that if you take that declaration that I mentioned from Germany, of the NPT, that might pave the way so for some kind of legal uh, framework for that not to jeopardize the NPT regime. But of course, if you do like indigenous, independent European nuclear deterrent, that might have contributions for, in my view, that might not be the best case to promote the NPT regime, and then probably at the moment would not be, in my view, a good idea
yeah,
to do completely independent nuclear deterrent, because there will be consequences. But of course, the most important thing is not to have spread of nuclear weapons. But we have seen since the Russia's war in Ukraine that we are already seeing spread of nuclear umbrella states, Finland, Sweden, part of NATO, and nuclear sharing states, meaning, for example, Belarus, a new nuclear sharing state. They evaluated the got out from the Budapest Memorandum, but by having Russian warheads in nuclear warheads in their territory, and other countries like South Korea is pursuing to be a nuclear sharing state as well. So, or Poland, as I mentioned. So we are seeing this spread of starting seeing the spread of nuclear umbrella states or nuclear sharing states, because every time that you are close to a nuclear power state that is contrary to your ideas or is an adversary to you, you want probably to align yourself with another nuclear weapon power that is adversary of that one. So that might we might see that, but at the moment, nuclear weapon states, I don't think we are in that moment yet, and I don't think that in the current situation the Europeans would contribute at the moment, from where I've seen the
yeah.
policies for that. So,
Yeah, and I guess if there was a pursuit towards an Anglo-French umbrella, then that would still leave room for other countries within Europe to kind of take on those non-proliferation conversations. Um, and it's useful to have voices from both sides of the argument. Well,
as long as they participate
yeah,
on the decision making process, some kind, some even if it's for consultations.